So if you want to really, really strengthen your relationship with your donors, get away from your technology and go see that person. Go old school. So executive directors, CEOs, here's your benchmark for time out there meeting your volunteers and donors. He had a female board member who's usually kind of an introvert, and she stood up and she said, "A lot of you know me, my husband and I. What you don't know is 25 years ago, we were in a desperate situation. When we came and talked to the executive director, the first thing he did was he helped us." And she got quite emotional. When she finished her story, she sat down. As they pulled into the dock, one of the other attendees came up to the executive director and said, "I never knew how important your services were. I'm going to give you a check for $25,000 tomorrow."
Let's go to segment 3 of our conversation. And that is, what should we be doing now to build relationships with donors so that down the road, when this multi-trillion-dollar amount of money is transferred and it's falling on our heads and we're going, now what? That we're ready for it. What do we, generally, how do we communicate and build relationships with foundations or donors? But especially in light of our uncertainty and the fact that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, the money coming into the nonprofit sector is going to be insane, and we have to prepare for that. What do we do now?
Yeah. So these devices that all of us have, these pieces of technology,
Yes.
they're very, very efficient. They can help us get a message out very, very efficiently, but they're not necessarily as effective. Now, Dr. Hardy, you were kind enough to share my educational background. So I actually studied how we as human beings convey meaning to one another using symbols called letters and numbers. So, and this has been studied for decades. 57% of meaning between two human beings is conveyed visually. So what does my face look like? What does my body look like? 37% is voice and 6% is content. So if you and I are working together, Mark, and I just want you to tell me your first reaction, right? And I look at you and I say, "Mark, come to my office."
I'm in trouble.
Now, why do you say that? Why do you say, what did you see or
I'll tell
hear?
you, most of the time when my bosses have said, Mark, come to my office, it's because I'm in trouble.
There you go, right? Yeah.
Right.
So did you see anything in my face or my voice? Did it give you some clue that,
Oh, sure. Yeah, your furrowed brow and your tone of voice and all that good
yeah,
stuff. Sure.
right. All right, version 2. Mark, come to my office.
It seems a little bit better. Now I
Yeah,
may go, this could be good or this could be bad because of my history, but no, it's definitely more inviting,
it's at
right?
least it's at least neutral, right?
Right.
Because there's a little smile on my face, my voice was different, right?
Sure.
So here's the interesting thing. I said the exact same 5 words. Mark, come to my office. But you got 2 different reactions. So if you want to really, really strengthen your relationship with your donors, get away from your technology and go see that person. Go old school. Meet them for coffee. Go for a walk with them. Okay? If you know your donor likes to have coffee at 6:30 a.m. at XYZ coffee shop, just call them up and say, "Hey, Mark, I'm going to be over at XYZ coffee shop tomorrow morning. You want to have a cup of coffee?" And they say, "Yeah, I'm usually get there at 6:30. Okay, I'll see you then." And make it light, make it easy. So executive directors, CEOs, here's your benchmark for time out there meeting your volunteers and donors. Look at your work week, take 2.5 days out of the office going see people. your donors, your volunteers, your partners, whoever they may be, whatever term you may use, 2.5 days is the minimum. Now, Dr. Hardy, you used to work at a place called the University of Notre Dame.
Right.
It's not a mystery on how they got their endowment fund to be $20 billion.
Yeah, that's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it?
Right, right.
But their relationship with their alumni is just incredible.
Yep. I know from talking to the vice president of advancement, institutional advancement, that if the CEO, who's always a Catholic priest, if he isn't out visiting donors, talking to alumni, talking to volunteers, if he's not doing that 5 or 6 days a week, the vice president of advancement is in big trouble. And
Right.
that started, that plan, that system started over 60 years ago. And it's the expectation that the president of Notre Dame is going to be doing that. I live in the state of Wisconsin. Donna Shalala used to be the CEO of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was hired by the University of Miami, which is a private institution. And her number one reason for being hired, she was good at fundraising.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
hey,
Most
everybody.
most university presidents are now fundraisers. They're
Right,
not really academic
right.
people. If you look at most of the presidents, actually Purdue University, the former governor of Indiana, was their president. I think he just recently retired.
Yeah,
But it's because he had a lot of connections and he knew how to raise money. I have a friend of mine, Nino Kuben, who is the president of a university in North Carolina. And the reason he was brought in is this guy knows how to raise money. So raising money is important. But let me ask you something. You know,
okay,
universities and hospitals, they're a different animal
right.
compared to most nonprofits. But there are a lot of CEOs and presidents and executive directors are listening to this going, oh, come on, Mark and Mark. I got enough to do. I got so much stuff on my plate. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. And now you're telling me I got to spend a bunch of time out with the donors doing this. Let me ask you this. Is it just as effective to assign your staff where they have to go meet with 2 or 3 donors a month, in addition to yourself and your board? Ask
Well,
your board to please go have a cup of coffee with donor, go have lunch or whatever, to spread that around. Because I guess if I was a donor, getting a call from one of the board members would be pretty cool because these are
yeah,
volunteers, right?
yes.
And,
So,
and they don't get paid to do this.
so most nonprofit organizations in our country, they have somewhere between 4 to 6 full-time equivalent staff. It could be the executive directors full time and the program directors full time, and then they got a bunch of part timers. Okay, so most effective in relationship building would be the recipient of the service, but that kind of get into
Right.
confidentiality issues, so that can make kind of touchy, right? Second most second most effective is current volunteer or donor. So you have a board member, and in most nonprofit boards, they average 13 to 15 board members. Okay. So if you set, and the board chair has to set this expectation. The executive director can request it, but it's the board chair that has to set the expectation to say, board members, we're going to ask you to help us create relationships. And we're going to ask you to help us deepen those relationships. Please, board chairs, do not say, we're going to ask you to do more fundraising because every board
Yeah.
member is just going to do this. Oh, no,
They're going to
right?
crawl under the table. Yeah.
No, they're not
Yeah.
going to do that, right?
Nobody wants to
So,
do that, right?
and it's going to be simple. You're each going to get a list of 10 names. Your job during this next month is to contact four of them, one a week, four. Just, it's either a phone call or a cup of coffee, or maybe you want to have a sandwich, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to go golfing. Whatever it is, one a week. Just say, hey, it's Mark from XYZ organization. I'm a volunteer board member, and I just wanted to call and say thanks for your support. It means a ton to us. Hey, Mark, I'm calling you up as a volunteer board member. And the recipient of the call is probably going to be, hey, wait a minute, I already gave a gift. You say, you know what? And that's why I'm calling, just to say thank you. And, I'm going to be at XYZ coffee shop tomorrow. If your schedule's open, let's chat. Here's what the amazing thing is going to happen. If the board chair and the board officers make that an expectation of the board members, the existing board members are probably going to be kind of like, yeah, okay. But the new board members are going to be, yeah, let's do this. This will be fun, right? And all of a sudden it gets to be more fun because at the next board meeting, the board chair can say, so how was your calls this last month? What went well? What didn't go so well? And the executive director is taking notes and like, oh boy, Mark Germano had a great phone call with Mark Hardy. That's excellent. Mark had a terrible call with Sally. Sally is really upset because the last time she was in the office, this looked raggedy and that looked raggedy. So, you take notes on this kind of stuff, right? And everybody thinks, oh man, that's just a waste of time. You know what? I worked with an organization in the middle of the country. Their board members were kind of like, I don't know, Maren, that ain't going to work so well, right? And so I'm a researcher. I said, well, does anybody want to guess what your donor retention is right now? And people were saying, oh, 70%, 80%. I said, here's the bad news. It's 40%, 40. And it's below the national standard. Well, and this is a very business type A group of people. And they were like, oh, what are we going to do to change that? I said, well, let's start with this. Within 2 years, 2 calendar years, 86% donor retention.
Well, now I want to interject something here. I want to do a total program with you
Okay.
about the spreadsheet that you have nonprofits do.
Yeah, so they take their existing data, and the reason I use Excel is in the world of computers, it's known as a comma separated value spreadsheet. So everybody has Excel or a CSV file, right?
Right.
The spreadsheet is organized by annual donor amount, and we start with the largest, so $100,000 and above annual donation from individual. Then it's 50 to 100, 25 to 50, 10 to 25, and on down to $1 to 50. And that first reaction I get from nonprofits is, well, we don't have anybody giving us $100,000 and above. Okay, well, there's a target opportunity, isn't it? There's a good chance, right? Well, we don't have anybody at the 25 to 50. Oh, well, there's another opportunity, right? So what happens very quickly, and I ask for it minimum of 3 years, but preferably 5 years, because then you can start to see some trends. And if they put in the donors at the level, let's say it's the $1,000 to $2,500 level, right? 5 years ago, they had one donor gave $1,000. That's an average gift of 1,000. But they've seen some growth, a little bit, and maybe in year 5, they've got 4 donors that have given $6,000. Well, that's an average gift of 1,500, right? So if they do that for each giving level, we can look at it very quickly and say, boy, we're doing a great job with the $50 to $100 donors, but we got nobody in the $500 to $1,000 donor level, and then we got a few above 1,000. And so I had an organization. This was a crisis intervention, family crisis intervention organization up in Minnesota. And when I asked the executive director to do this, his first reaction was, why? I mean, I don't know. No.
That's always the first reaction.
Yeah, no. So, and he was the full-time person, and then he had what I'll call a program. She was an intervention specialist. So, when these crises would happen, it was basically the two of them. And I said, I know it's going to be extra work, but he had a board member who was also part of this discussion, who is good at Excel. And the board member and he is like, okay, we'll work on this together, right? So we work on it, and it's a lot of data, but we looked at it together. They sent it to me, and I highlighted in green the things that I thought they were doing well, which donor groups they were doing well with. And then I highlighted in yellow where there were some cautions, and then I highlighted in red where nothing was happening. And So you open this picture up, you see green, yellows, and reds, and guess where the executive director's eyes went to first? Do you
Probably
think
to
he
the
went to the
red.
red, the yellow, or the green?
Well, no, probably to the green.
Immediately.
Yeah, to the green. This is well, I'm
No,
doing well. Okay. No, what did he do? Go to the red?
no, straight to the red. Like we
Really?
don't have
Okay.
anybody here, and we don't have anybody here, and so
Oh,
I
okay.
had to say, whoa, 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 time. Let's look at what you're doing well, and why do you think you're doing well with? And there were three separate donor groups that they were pretty doing well with. He
Yeah.
goes, well, and he started brainstorming a little bit, and he said, well, we do this and we do this. And I said, so let's look at the yellows. Let's not go to the reds just yet. Let's look at the yellows, right? Because they were doing pretty good with the $1,000 to $2,500 level
Hmm.
donor group, but the
Right.
yellows were in that $2,500 to $10,000 group, in that
Okay.
spread. And but he wanted to go like to the 50s and the hundreds. I like, whoa, slow down, slow down. I said it's easier for a donor to go from, let's say, 2,500 to 5,000, but you want them to go from 2,500 to 25,000. That's going to take
Not
some
gonna
time.
happen. Yeah.
It ain't going
Right.
to happen.
Yeah.
So we looked at the yellows, and the board member that worked on the spreadsheet and we were on a Zoom call together. They started brainstorming together, right? And they came up with this idea. Now, this particular organization, Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, uh, the executive director, it's really complicated to get people. I said, you got a bunch of snowbirds, right? What do you do during the summer? Oh man, we got this boat that, it goes around on the lake and they serve dinner and we can have some music. I said, okay, see if you can do something. Just invite somebody to go out on a cruise, an evening cruise. And the volunteer said, I'll bring the bug spray. So anyway, so they did it, and they did it really well. And I said, here's the key. When you invite them, make sure they know we're not going to ask you for money.
Right.
We just want to tell you what your money's doing.
Yeah. My
It,
experience with that, of inviting them, well, not only to events like that, and just, you can share what the organization is doing, right? Here's what we've accomplished, and here's, some case histories, maybe some stories about people who have been
right,
helped, not their names, of course, because of
right.
confidentiality, but the stories. I have found with donors and with foundations that if you invite them to come see what you're doing, that build, because most of them, I mean, they know intellectually what you do,
Right.
but they
Yeah.
don't know viscerally what you do. So the
Right.
question is it a good idea to invite them not only to your events and go to lunch on, but invite them to see your program in action?
Absolutely,
Okay,
positively, 100%. So I want to go back to that Minnesota story, if I could, for
sure.
a moment,
Yeah.
and then I'll give some data because I just can't resist not giving some data, right? So they
The
did this.
researcher in you coming out, my friend. That's good.
So they had board members and they had donors, and they had donors that they thought could give above $2,500. And and I had scripted the board chair and the executive director. I said, this is supposed to be a fun night. So we're going to get on the boat. We're going to have some fellowship, some food, right? And you, executive director, you board chair, you get 5 to 8 minutes. You, executive director, you get 5 minutes. And then you open it up for Q&A, right? This, no PowerPoints, right? This is just a conversation. So the board chair does his piece. I got this out from the executive director. And the executive director is, he's sharing, he's talking a little bit about the impact that they're having. And they go for Q&A. And they're about 10 or 15 minutes into the Q&A. And there was a donor who was questioning why, are these services really necessary? And the executive director shared with me that he had a female board member who's usually kind of an introvert. And she stood up and she said, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about why these things are important. A lot of you know me, my husband and I, very, very successful business people in this community. What you don't know is 25 years ago, we were in a desperate situation. I'm not going to give you the details, but it was bad. And she got kind of choked up. And she said, when we came and talked to the executive director, he didn't ask us how much money we made. He didn't tell us, oh, you got to fill out all these forms. the first thing he did was he helped us. He helped us with our family and our children. And I'm talking about basic things. And she got quite emotional. And 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 nobody was expecting this, right? It was a shock. When she finished her story, she sat down. The cruise continued, as they pulled into the dock, one of the other attendees came up to the executive director and said, I never knew how important your services were. I'm going to give you a check for $25,000 tomorrow. This
Wow.
was from $1,000 annual donor, right?
But actually,
$25,000
she
check.
she got to his heart, right? She went
Very
directly to
much.
his
Yeah,
heart. This wasn't an intellectual thing.
very much.
This was,
No.
this is what we do. This is who we are. That's
Right.
what I have to tell you personally, because I'm a little jaded because I've been in the nonprofit sector for quite a while. I remember when I first started at Notre Dame, the dean had bought a table at the Center for the Homeless annual fundraiser. And
Oh,
she
yeah.
said, do you want a seat? And I said, sure. I had just started, hadn't been there maybe a month. Was not
Hmm.
familiar with the Center of the Homeless because I hadn't lived in South Bend in 10 years. And so I went, and the executive director got up for about 3 minutes, and that
Hmm.
was it. And just said, just welcome people. And then he had three people who the Center for the Homeless had helped get up and tell their story. And one of
Yeah.
them was a young lady who was 17 years old, whose mother and sisters had to live at the Center of the Homeless because they were victims of abuse and violence, and they had to have a
Yeah.
place to stay, and they had no money. And they'd been there for, I don't know, maybe a year or two because they had no other place to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And she said, if it wouldn't have been for the Center of the Homeless, I don't know what we've done. And she said, oh, and by the way, I'm valedictorian of my class this year.
Yeah. See, that's it's the head and the heart,
Yeah.
right? You have to have both. Now,
Dude, I wrote a check right there. I had no
yeah,
idea who these people were, but I wrote a
right.
check right there.
Right
You
there.
know? Yeah.
Number one in her class, you would have never, ever, if you saw her in school, you would have never said, oh, that girl's homeless,
No.
right? And there
And you
she
have to
is.
say, well, the homeless shelter obviously had a hand in this young woman's success, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, again, it's number one motivator. Let's go back to the research, right? Let's go back to the head part, the research. Number one motivator for people to make a significant gift to the organization. And significant can be different. For me, it might be $100. For somebody else, it might be $10,000. It varies. But significant difference, significant donation. Number one motivator, they understand the impact of their gift. You know what tax consideration? Number five. Everybody said, oh, you're doing it because, yeah, everybody says, oh, that's a tax deduction. That's why you're doing it. No, not really. It's because I want to help people, right? Now, let's talk about other people in the organization, other staff members. If you go to them and say, hey, I want to involve you in the fundraising process, they're all going to be like, oh, I'm a counselor. I'm the accountant. I'm the bookkeeper.
I'm a
No,
program
no, no, no,
director,
no.
yeah.
Right, no, no, no. So you start simple, right? I, so what I want you to do is I want you to answer this question, and you may want to write it out first before I record you. Why do you like to work here? What is it that excites you about working here? And go ahead and write out your answer, okay? And then have not the executive director, because then the staff members are going to feel under a lot of pressure, but maybe your chief development officer or your program officer. They take their little digital device and make a simple, keep it simple. So let's say, Mark, you work for me. I'm the program officer at XYZ organization, and you've practiced, you've written out your answer, and I say, okay, now we're recording. You say, Mark, what is it that motivates you to work here? Or maybe I'd say, what do you like working here? And just hit record. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, collect those stories, right? And we've got these great video editing tools. You could add a little music to it. And so what you do then is you collect those stories and you show the board members, hey, here's some staff members, here's what excites them. Suddenly the board member, and then you say to the board chair says this to the board, we want to do the same thing with each of you,
Yeah.
right? Because now the staff done it and they can see that Johnny, the new receptionist, he just did his, and Johnny's like 24, and he did his little bit, right? And you'll not be shocked to know this. People who are younger in age are much more comfortable in this video
Sure.
situation, right? But even the older folks, even us old war horses like you and me, we like it too, right? Everybody likes to be a star. So then you collect the board members. Now, here's the little tricky part sometimes is then you go to clients and ask the clients. But you have to be careful about confidentiality and making sure they sign a release statement. But you start to collect these stories, and suddenly, before you know it, you got 30, 40, 50 stories. Don't post all of them all at once on your website, but make it a feature on your landing page,
Sure.
right? One or two, maybe one for a week or two for a week, and then you change it because you got 50 stories, 60 stories, right? You could rotate them, right? And if you put that on the landing page, which is the one that everybody goes to see first, they're going to understand, oh, wow, gee, I never knew they did that, you know?
And what's important about that too, and we're going to do a special program on marketing your nonprofit with Roger Cape, who is an expert in this area.
It
You
was
and I
awesome.
worked with Roger. He is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about using video and social media and all that. But what I love about that, as you have said in your seminars, I remember a lot of what you said, by the way, I just want you to know.
Yay.
You claim that probably 80 to 90% of potential donors go to your website first before they consider giving a gift. So if you're not telling your story on the website and you're not telling in a good way, you're not going to build that immediate relationship with a potential donor.
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's the other piece is that over 30% of first time donors will never contact the organization. They'll go to the website and they'll make their decision about making a donation. So if we make it easy and compelling, right? And you can add all kinds of pages about who you are, what you are, but your landing page shows impact and gives people an opportunity to be engaged, maybe as a volunteer, maybe as a donor, but start with impact. That's what your landing page is about. Name of our organization, what we do in the world. Here's two stories. Simple, 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 simple. So, man, we got a lot of shows we got to do here, Mark.
Well, and I think we can expand on this whole relationship thing. I would really like to do a show. And again, listeners, if you want us to do this, let us know, because otherwise I'm not going to spend my time doing it. But if you think it's important to maybe take them through step by step on how you cultivate a donor, how you treat them once they become a donor, how you maintain them as a donor, so on and so forth, all the way up to even planned gifts, right? I
Yep,
mean,
yep,
you've
yep, yep.
cultivated this donor and now we're in planned gifts. So what is the donor cycle?
Right.
And how do we, as nonprofit professionals, whether we're executive directors, board members, volunteers, program people, whatever, how do we help in that process? And I love the fact that you've also said this, that 90% of fundraising is relationship building and
100%.
10% is doing the ask, right?
Egg, say that again, please. Please, Mark,
90%,
please.
well, you said it, so you say it.
So please listen to what our host, Mark Hardy, has said to you. 90% of successful donor fundraising is building the relationship, understanding what motivates the donors, and then please thank them for their gift. Okay. If you do that and you spend maybe 10% of your time asking for the money, you're going to be wildly successful.
goodness.
Keep this in mind. Mission brings the money. Money allows you to deliver on the mission. So if you talk about your mission, don't tell people what your fundraising goal is. They could care less. Whether you want to go for $1 million, $10 million, who cares? Tell me what you're doing with the money. Tell me how lives are changed. Tell me about your mission. And then once I get to know your mission, get to know me as a donor, what motivates and excites me about your organization, then give me the opportunity to make that gift. And then please say thank you.
And keep
I
me
work,
informed, right?
keep
You
me
know,
informed.
yeah,
I
yeah, let me
worked,
know what's going on, right?
I worked with a corporate foundation when I worked up in Northeast Wisconsin. Lovely foundation, very generous corporate foundation. And the corporate foundation giving officer, who also worked in the HR department, he and I developed a good working relationship. And he said to me, and one of the things he loved about working with me, he told me this. He said, "I love getting your notes." I said, "Really? You do?" He opened a drawer in his desk, and he had all of the thank you notes that I had sent him. I was like, "Wow, okay." And he said, I went to our CEO this past year, and I said, "We are not going to send another grant to an organization that does not thank us." And I said, "Wow, Steve, I hope it's 100% are saying thank you." Saw him maybe 6 or 7 months later, and he said, "Hey, remember that thing I told you about not sending money out?" Right? He said, 40%, 40% of the organizations that they were sending money to, and these weren't $10 checks, they weren't $100 checks, they were four and five figure checks, right? 40% never acknowledged the gift.
So
Here's
once
what's
they
even
got the money, they just basically forgot the donor, right?
right.
Right.
Here's the sadder news. Of that 40% who didn't get a check, over half of them never called him to say, "Hey, what's going on?" They just so if you take advantage, if you just assume that you're going to get the money, to assume makes an ass of you and me, and you ain't
Yeah.
going to get the dough, Joe. So please, please thank your donors, please. And I don't mean the text message that says, "Thanks for your $10 contribution." That ain't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about calling people, writing notes. And we can get into a lot more detail, and I'll give some practical things and some metrics and just really simple steps that any
Yeah.
organization can do.
I think that'd be a great program. And in addition to that, we're going to do a program on program and organizational evaluation and probably board evaluation because in order to say, here's how we're impacting the world or our community or whoever you're impacting, you have to evaluate the program. You have to ask yourself, what is the ripple effect of what we're doing? And that takes a formal evaluation, whether that's, numbers, metrics, or whether it's qualitative research, surveys, whatever. You have to know what the ripple
Yeah.
effect of that is. And then you can share that with your potential donors, with your audience on your website, all that good stuff. Because you're right. If donors and foundations and even government funders, if you can answer the question, this is how we create a better world, they're going to be ecstatic. And I'm going to talk about this in another segment, but a very important conversation I had with the vice president of a very large Michigan private foundation.
Mm.
He retired, and he said, we were having this conversation. I said, well, what are you going to do now? And, what was your biggest challenge as a foundation executive and all that? He goes, you know what my biggest challenge was? He said, failure. He said, Mark, 65% of the grants that we gave out failed. Only 25% accomplished the goal that they set out in their proposal. Or they went in a different direction and didn't even try to accomplish it. And he said, you don't know until somebody gets the money, really, what they're going to do. He said, so when people complain that we only give money to the same organizations, the reason we do that is because we know they're going to get the job done, right? We don't want to give it to a new organization we know nothing about unless they have a track record and they can prove it.
Right.
He said, and even then, our failure rate is high. I mean, let's face it, we're dealing with some pretty serious social programs,
Right.
social problems that, the solutions are going to take decades, if not, years and maybe even centuries to solve. But the fact is, even if you move it incrementally, you need to document that.
Right.
So, Mark, listen, thank you for all of your information. I'm sure we're going to be doing many more videos because, people don't realize that 10% of the population of the United States is employed by the nonprofit sector.
Right.
And I would have to say the first, 18 to 20, 40 years of our life is totally impacted by the nonprofit sector, nonprofit churches, nonprofit schools, nonprofit little leagues, Boy Scouts, nonprofit colleges. We are totally influenced by the nonprofit sector, and most of us know nothing about it. So,
Exactly.
so hopefully, even though this is for nonprofit professionals, maybe other people will watch it and go, "Oh, I never knew that." I hope so. I hope we get the message out there to donors and potential board members and so on and so forth. So, thank you, Mark Germano. And we will be back with you and cover many more programs. And if you want one on evaluation, let me know. I have an expert in that area. And Mark is an expert in more areas than just fundraising. In fact, we've talked about doing one on strategic planning because that's really the starting point, right?
True.
So we'll probably do that. If you want a program in that, let us know. All right, Mark, thank you. And as always, it's been a great pleasure. And you don't know this, listeners, but we love our carrot cake. And so we have a carrot cake club with Mark Germano and Roger Cave and I. And even though we shouldn't eat it, when we get together, it's a must. So, all right, buddy.
Thank you.
Take care. All right,
Thank you.
you. And
I
have a
love
great
it.
day. All right.
Okay.
See ya. If you liked what Mark Germano had to say in this final part 3, give us a like and subscribe to our channel. And if you want a free transcript outline of this interview, just click below. There are many aspects of fundraising, so if you would like him to address other fundraising challenges, let us know in the comments. As Mark and I discussed, sharing the successes of your organization and its programs with funders is absolutely crucial to help you raise money. You need to evaluate your nonprofit and the work it does. If you want to know how to do that, well, click on this video. It's brand new, where I interview evaluation expert Janet Hansel. And she will talk about a system of evaluation and how to measure your nonprofit's ripple effect on your community and the world. And if you missed part 1 of Mark Germano, click here.